In October of 2019, the National Park Service received a report. The report was filed under Visitor Incident, Unresolved, reference number NPS-BTNF 2019-1047, logged at the Tagwoti Corridor Ranger Station in northwestern Wyoming. The filing date was October the 14th. The reporting ranger was stationed at the eastern boundary of Bridger-Teton National Forest, at a position approximately 9 miles west of the Wind River Reservation boundary line. The report described a pattern, not a single incident, a pattern over a period of 14 months. 7 separate hikers had submitted written accounts to the station, describing identical experiences within the same half-mile stretch of trail. The corridor ran northeast to southwest through a section of lodgepole pine, an open meadow at an elevation of 8,400 feet. Each account described the same sequence: silence that arrived without transition, a cessation of ambient sound so complete that the hikers reported being unable to hear their own footsteps, disorientation that followed within minutes, and a physical sensation described in 6 of the 7 accounts as pressure applied to the chest from no external source. The report noted the geographic coordinates of the corridor. It noted the dates of each account. It noted that no 2 hikers had been present in the corridor at the same time. Then the report stopped. There was no follow-up designation, no assigned investigator, no closure notation. The file sat in the Regional Incident Database, status listed as pending review, for the next 4 years without a single additional entry. The corridor did not stop receiving visitors. The accounts did not stop being filed. The file remained open because no one closed it. And no one closed it because no one returned to it. And what that gap contains is the subject of what follows. Harold Runningwater is 71 years old. He has served as land management officer for the Eastern Shoshone Tribe on the Wind River Reservation for 38 years. He negotiated the 2004 Cooperative Land Use Agreement between the Eastern Shoshone Tribal Council and the United States Forest Service, an agreement that governs access protocols for 17,000 acres of adjacent federal land, including the corridor referenced in file NPS-BTNF 2019-1047. He agreed to speak on the condition that the specific location of certain tribal reference points within the corridor not be published by coordinates. He is not a storyteller. He is a land management officer. Runningwater has known about the corridor since he was a child. His knowledge of it is not oral tradition in the sense that term is typically applied. It is institutional. It is documented. The Eastern Shoshone maintain a formal land record system separate from federal land records that predates Wyoming statehood by several decades. The corridor appears in those records under the designation Wangitakuskan-Skan. In the Shoshone language, the phrase translates approximately as the place where the breath does not move. The designation is not metaphorical. Runningwater explained that the name refers to a documented acoustic property of the location, one that tribal land managers had recorded in formal notation, going back at least 140 years in written form, and further in oral records that predate written documentation. The breath does not move is a description of what happens to sound in that half-mile corridor under specific atmospheric conditions. It is a physical observation, not a spiritual one. And Runningwater was precise about that distinction. He was asked how long the Eastern Shoshone had formally avoided the corridor. He said the avoidance was not a prohibition. He said that was an important difference. A prohibition implied that something was forbidden. What the Eastern Shoshone maintained was a protocol. The protocol was a set of 4 rules governing how a person entered the corridor, moved through it, and exited it. The rules existed, because the corridor had properties that were documented and known, and the protocol existed to account for those properties. He was asked what the 4 rules were. He said the first rule was that no one entered the corridor alone. He said this rule was the oldest of the 4, and that its origin was recorded in the tribal land documents as a response to a specific incident in the winter of 1881, in which a tribal member entered the corridor alone and was found 2 days later at the eastern meadow edge, uninjured but unable to account for the time between entry and recovery. The tribal council at that time formally added the rule to the land protocol. It had not been amended since. He said the second rule was that no one remained in the corridor after the ambient sound returned. He said this required explanation. He said the acoustic silence that characterized the corridor was not permanent. It arrived and it lifted. The protocol identified the lifting of the silence as the point of maximum disorientation risk, not the silence itself. When sound returned, it returned altered. The quality of it was different. He said tribal members who had studied the corridor described the returning sound as carrying information that the human auditory system was not structured to process correctly. He did not elaborate on what that information was. He said elaboration was not his to offer. The second rule, therefore, was departure before return. He said the third rule governed what a person brought into the corridor. No recording equipment, no devices designed to capture or measure sound. The rule predated electronic equipment. In its original form, it referred to instruments used for sound measurement that were in use among surveyors and naturalists in the late 19th century. The rule had been extended over time to include all categories of recording and measurement technology as those categories developed. He was asked why. He said the rule existed because the corridor responded to measurement. He did not say what that meant by way of mechanism. He said the response was documented. He said it was consistent. He said that on multiple occasions, over multiple decades, individuals who had introduced measurement equipment into the corridor had experienced acceleration of the standard sequence. The silence arrived faster. The disorientation was more acute. The pressure sensation was more pronounced. He said the tribal land records contained 11 documented instances of this acceleration across a period of 90 years. He said the fourth rule was the simplest. A person who exited the corridor did not re-enter it within a period of 30 days. He was asked why 30 days specifically. He said that the 30-day interval had been established empirically. He said that individuals who had re-entered the corridor within a shorter interval had reported that the silence recognized them. He used that phrase. He did not qualify it. He did not walk it back. He said the silence recognized them, and that what this meant in documented terms was that the full sequence of experiences arrived immediately upon re-entry, without the gradual onset that characterized a first or properly spaced entry. He was asked whether the avoidance had ever been reconsidered. He looked at the recorder. He said the land had not changed. He said the arrangement had not changed. He said he did not expect either to change. He was asked, before the interview ended, whether he believed the National Park Service understood what they had documented in file NPS-BTNF 2019-1047. He said the file described the symptoms. He said describing the symptoms was not the same as understanding what produced them. He said the Eastern Shoshone had spent 140 years working on that second question. He said they had not finished. Meredith Calloway is 44 years old. She has served as a research associate in wildlife acoustics at the University of Wyoming for 16 years. She is the lead author of a 2018 study published in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America examining infrasound propagation in high-elevation conifer forest environments across the Rocky Mountain West. That study is cited in 31 subsequent peer-reviewed publications. She agreed to speak for this account on the condition that her institutional affiliation not be presented as endorsing any interpretation of her experience beyond the documented physical record. She is not a storyteller, she is an acoustical researcher. In August of 2019, Calloway entered the Tagwoti corridor alone. She was there to calibrate field equipment. She was preparing for a separate study, examining how lodgepole pine forest density affected low-frequency sound transmission at altitude. The corridor had been selected by her graduate assistant based on elevation, forest composition, and proximity to an existing trail system. The selection had been made from topographical and ecological data. Neither Calloway nor her assistant had any knowledge of tribal land designations for the area, any knowledge of file NPS BTNF 2019-10-47, or any knowledge of the 4 rules governing entry under Eastern Shoshone Protocol. She carried with her a calibrated field microphone array, a digital sound level meter, a data logger, and a handheld atmospheric pressure monitor. She entered the corridor at approximately 9:40 in the morning. She described the ambient sound environment upon entry as normal for the location. Wind movement through pine canopy. Distant water. Bird calls consistent with mid-elevation Wyoming habitat in late summer. She noted that the sound level meter was reading at approximately 42 decibels, which she described as consistent with her expectations for the site. She had been in the corridor for approximately 11 minutes when the readings changed. She said the meter dropped to a reading she described as anomalous. She said the number on the display was not 0, because 0 would have indicated equipment failure, and she had confirmed equipment function prior to entry. The number on the display was 4 decibels. She said that in her 16 years of field work, she had recorded a reading of 4 decibels in an open outdoor environment on one previous occasion, and that occasion had been inside a specially constructed anechoic chamber at a research facility in Colorado. She said the reading made no sense for an outdoor location at any elevation, under any atmospheric conditions she was aware of. She said she took a photograph of the display. That photograph exists. It is in her field records, time-stamped August the 9th, 2019, at 9:51 in the morning. The display reads 4.2 decibels. She said that within approximately 2 minutes of that reading, she became aware that she could not hear her own footsteps on the trail surface. She said the trail surface was compacted gravel and dry soil. She said footsteps on that surface should have been clearly audible to her. She said she stopped walking and listened. She said she could hear nothing. She said she then struck the trail surface 3 times with the heel of her boot, hard enough that she could feel the impact through the sole of her foot, and she heard nothing on any of the 3 strikes. She said she then experienced what she described as orientation loss. She said she was clear that this was not dizziness in any clinical sense she had previously experienced. She said it was specifically spatial. She said she knew where she was in terms of geography. She knew she was in the corridor. She knew the trail ran northeast to southwest. She said the loss was not of geographic knowledge, but of directional instinct. She said that when she tried to identify which direction was north, she could not produce the instinctive response that she said had always been automatic for her in the field. She said she had to use her compass. Her compass produced a stable reading. The north indicated by the compass did not match her instinct. She said she stood in place for approximately 4 minutes, using the compass reading to reorient herself. She said during those 4 minutes, she experienced the pressure sensation. She described it as a weight applied to the sternum from the front, not sharp, not painful, but sustained and directional. She said it felt like a hand pressing against her chest. She said there was nothing in front of her. After 4 minutes, she made the decision to exit the corridor. She said that decision was not made from fear. She said she had assessed the situation and concluded that the equipment was producing readings she could not account for, that she was experiencing perceptual effects she could not account for, and that continuing to work in those conditions would compromise her data. She said it was a research decision. She exited the corridor at 10:17 in the morning. She said that upon exiting, ambient sound returned within approximately 30 seconds. She said the return was not gradual. She said it arrived. She said the bird calls and the wind and the distant water were simply present again, as though they had not stopped. She said the sound level meter read 39 decibels upon exit. She said she sat at the trailhead for 20 minutes before she drove back to Laramie. She did not file a formal incident report with the National Park Service. She was asked why. She said she was an acoustical researcher. She said she had no framework for what she had recorded that would survive peer review. She said filing an official report about a sound level reading of 4.2 decibels in an outdoor environment, accompanied by an account of being unable to hear her own footsteps, would have required her to offer an explanation. She said she did not have one. She said she was not willing to attach her name to a document she could not defend scientifically. She said she kept the field records. She kept the timestamp photograph. She kept the data logger output from the full 37 minutes she had spent in and around the corridor that morning. She had not returned to the corridor. She had not been asked by the National Park Service whether she had been there. She was not in file NPS BTNF 2019-1047, although she had been inside its subject during the same 14-month period the file covered. And although her equipment had produced physical data that matched the written accounts the file contained, no one had connected those two things until this account. In 2021, the National Park Service Regional Office in Jackson, Wyoming, issued a formal response to an inquiry submitted by a trail users advocacy group regarding documented visitor complaints from the Tagwoti corridor. The response was prepared by the Office of the Regional Natural Resources Manager. It was 3 pages in length. The response identified the corridor as an area of documented infrasound activity. It stated that geological survey data from the region indicated the presence of a low-frequency acoustic resonance phenomenon produced by wind interaction with the specific topography of the corridor, including the angle of the surrounding ridgeline, the density of the lodgepole pine stands, and the orientation of the meadow opening at the corridor's western end. It stated that this type of phenomenon was known to produce auditory suppression effects in humans at close range, and that the effects were temporary and presented no documented health risk. The response categorized the visitor accounts in file NPS BTNF 2019-1047 under the classification Auditory Environmental Anomaly, subcategory Geological. It noted that no further investigation was warranted. It recommended that trail signage be updated to indicate that the area was a zone of occasional acoustic irregularity and that visitors who experienced disorientation should rest and hydrate before continuing. The response made no reference to the Eastern Shoshone land designation for the corridor. It made no reference to the Cooperative Land Use Agreement negotiated in 2004. It made no reference to the 4 rules. The trail signage was not updated. The file remained open. The geological explanation requires specific conditions to produce the effects documented in the 7 visitor accounts: wind interaction with ridge topography, as a driver of infrasound requires sustained wind at a minimum threshold velocity. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration weather station at the Tagwoti Pass monitoring site, located 4.3 miles from the corridor's eastern entry point, logs wind speed and direction at 15-minute intervals. Its records are publicly accessible through the Federal Climate Data Archive. On October the 14th, 2019, the date on which file NPS BTNF 2019-1047 was opened, the weather station recorded average wind speeds of 2 miles per hour between the hours of 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening. 2 miles per hour. The threshold for sustained ridge topography infrasound generation in the relevant scientific literature is documented at a minimum of 12 miles per hour sustained over a period of no less than 30 minutes. On October the 14th, 2019, that threshold was not met. The first visitor account in the file was filed on that date. It described a windless corridor. Still air. No canopy movement. No ambient wind sound. The visitor had noted the stillness specifically because it had seemed unusual. The account was in the file. The atmospheric record was in the public archive. No one had placed them side by side. The second contradiction involved Callaway's data logger output from August the 9th, 2019. The data logger had recorded atmospheric pressure throughout her time in the corridor. A geological infrasound source of sufficient magnitude to produce auditory suppression at 42 decibels of ambient sound would generate a measurable atmospheric pressure signature. At the recording location, the signature would appear in the data as a low-frequency oscillation in the pressure readings, typically in the range of 1 to 10 Hz, with amplitude measurable by a standard field atmospheric monitor of the type Callaway carried. Callaway's data logger recorded no such oscillation. The pressure readings across the 37-minute recording period showed a flat line with minor variation attributable to standard atmospheric fluctuation at altitude. There was no low-frequency signature. There was no oscillation. There was nothing in the pressure data that corresponded to an active geological infrasound source. The silence that Callaway recorded at 4.2 decibels had no detectable physical driver in her data. The third contradiction was structural. The geological explanation described a passive phenomenon. Wind and topography interacting to produce a standing wave that suppressed ambient sound in the corridor. A passive phenomenon does not change based on what a visitor carries. A passive phenomenon does not accelerate its effects in the presence of measurement equipment. A standing acoustic wave produced by ridge geometry and pine density does not respond to the introduction of a field microphone array. Harold Runningwaiter's documented land records described 11 instances across 90 years in which measurement equipment introduced into the corridor produced accelerated onset of the full sequence of effects. A passive geological phenomenon does not have 11 documented instances of responding to the presence of instruments. The official explanation accounted for the what. It did not account for the 11. The 2019 incident was not the first time the corridor had generated a formal record. In October of 2009, a solo elk hunter filed a written complaint with the Shoshone National Forest District Office after becoming disoriented in the Lodgepole Pine section of Trail 098, which runs through the western boundary of the Tagwoti corridor. The hunter, a 37-year-old resident of Dubois, Wyoming, described a period of approximately 40 minutes in which he was unable to hear any ambient sound, including 2 rifle shots he fired into the air as a distress signal. He reported that he felt the recoil of both shots in his shoulder. He heard neither discharge. The district office categorized the complaint under lost and disoriented, attributed the experience to altitude and dehydration, and closed the file. The hunter had not been lost. He knew where he was on the trail. He had documented this in his account. He had said specifically that he had not been lost. He had said he could not hear. The distinction did not appear in the closure notation. In July of 2014, a 3-person ecological survey team contracted by the Wyoming Game and Fish Department conducted a vegetation census in the meadow section at the western end of the corridor. 2 members of the team remained at the meadow edge to record data. 1 member, a field botanist named in the survey contract as the lead vegetation specialist, entered the pine section alone to collect tree core samples. The survey report, filed with Wyoming Game and Fish upon contract completion, noted in its appendix that the lead vegetation specialist had returned from the pine section without the core samples and had reported being unable to complete the work due to equipment malfunction. The equipment identified as malfunctioning was a standard increment borer, a hand tool with no electronic components, no battery, no moving parts beyond a threaded shaft. The survey report did not elaborate on how a hand tool with no electronic components had malfunctioned. The lead vegetation specialist did not submit a supplementary account. The appendix notation remained the only record. The core samples were never collected. A follow-up survey was not scheduled. In September of 2021, 2 years after file NPS BTNF 2019-10-47 was opened, and in the same season the National Park Service issued its geological explanation. A backcountry permit holder entered Bridger-Teton Sector 7 on a 5-day solo traverse. Sector 7 shares a boundary with the Tagwoti corridor at its northern edge. The permit holder completed the traverse and submitted a post-trip debrief to the backcountry office as required by permit conditions. The debrief was routine in all sections except one. The permit holder noted that, on the second day of the traverse, while moving through the northern boundary zone adjacent to the Tagwoti corridor, he had experienced a period of complete silence, lasting what he estimated to be between 20 and 40 minutes. He noted that he had been unable to hear himself speak during this period. He had attempted to call out to confirm the effect, and had felt the muscular effort of speaking without hearing any resulting sound. He noted that he had not experienced this before in any of his previous backcountry trips, which the permit record showed numbered 31 over the preceding 12 years. He rated the experience in the debrief form's optional comments field as the most disorienting thing that has happened to me in the field. The debrief was filed. The Backcountry Permit Office does not cross-reference debrief accounts with National Park Service incident files from adjacent zones. The permit holder's account was not added to file NPS BTNF 2019-10-47. The file did not know he had been there. File NPS BTNF 2019-10-47 currently lists 11 accounts, 7 from the original 14-month reporting period that prompted its creation, and 4 submitted in the years following the issuance of the geological explanation in 2021. Each of the 4 subsequent accounts used the same language to describe the same sequence. Each of the 4 subsequent accounts was filed by a different person. None of the 4 persons knew one another. None had access to any of the prior accounts before filing their own. The pattern is not declining. The corridor is currently open to public access without restriction. The Eastern Shoshone Land Protocol governing the corridor, including the 4 rules, has not been amended. Harold Runningwater confirmed this in a follow-up communication in 2023. He said the protocol was last reviewed by the Tribal Land Committee in 2022. He said the committee made no changes. He said the committee did not expect to make changes. Meredith Callaway's field records from August the 9th, 2019 remain in her possession. They have not been submitted to any institutional archive. They have not been shared with the National Park Service. The time-stamped photograph of the sound level meter displaying 4.2 decibels exists on a hard drive in her office in Laramie. The data has not been formally analyzed. No one from the National Park Service, the Shoshone National Forest District Office, the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, or any academic institution has requested it. The corridor has received at least 43 documented visitor accounts, describing the same sequence of experiences across the period from 2009 to 2023. 43 is the count from records that are accessible: the solo elk hunter from Dubois, the botanist from the Vegetation Survey, the permit holder from Sector 7, the 7 original accounts in the federal file, Callaway's undocumented visit, the 4 subsequent filings, and others documented in sources that are partial, incomplete, or held in record systems that do not speak to one another. 43 is a floor. The 4 rules Harold Runningwater described are not posted at the trailhead. They are not referenced in any federal land management document covering the corridor. A visitor entering the corridor today will find a standard brown carcinite trail marker indicating the route number and the distance to the next waypoint. The marker says nothing about sound. It says nothing about what to do if the sound stops. It says nothing about the 37 minutes Meredith Callaway spent inside the silence with a meter that recorded 4.2 decibels and a pressure monitor that recorded nothing at all. The corridor does not ask whether you know the rules before you enter, and the question that file NPS BTNF 2019-10-47 cannot answer. The question that 43 accounts and 140 years of Eastern Shoshone land documentation and 1 time-stamped photograph of a meter reading and 11 instances of accelerated onset in the presence of measurement equipment cannot answer is this: if the corridor responds to the presence of instruments designed to measure it, what has it been learning about the people who bring them?